Right, everyone. Good evening, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Christine Ingram. I'm the local interest librarian at the New Hanover County Public Library. And tonight we'll be meeting from May's North Carolina Reads 2022 program. North Carolina Reads is North Carolina Humanities statewide book club for 2022. North Carolina Reads features 5 books that explore issues of racial, social, and gender equality and the history and culture of North Carolina. Any views, findings, conclusions, opinions, or recommendations expressed do not necessarily represent those of North Carolina Humanities or the National Endowment for the Humanities. North Carolina Reads is made possible in part by A More Perfect Union, a special initiative grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. This is a program of the North Carolina Center for the Book. The 5 selected books feature stories of American perseverance and diversity. The people, places, and events in the books also pose critical questions about how North Carolinians view their role in helping to form a more just and inclusive society. North Carolina Humanities hopes these stories encourage engaging, productive conversation among participants. At the heart of North Carolina Reads is North Carolina Humanities' desire to connect communities through shared reading experiences. Reading is important because it helps us develop our critical thinking skills, strengthens our minds, vocabulary, and mental health, and creates opportunities for us to empathize with others' stories and experiences. May's book has been Pauli Murray, A Personal and Political Life by Troy Saxby. Tonight's platform is via Zoom. For those attending online, please type any questions or comments into the chat box on your screen or electronically raise your hand when the time comes for questions. Joining us tonight is Frachele Scott, a local of Oxford, North Carolina in Granville County. She received her BA in political science in 1999 at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and her Juris Doctorate from the North Carolina Central University School of Law in 2004. For just over a decade, she served as manager of 2 historic site properties with the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Currently, she serves as managing director of the Pauli Murray Center for History and Social Justice in Durham, North Carolina. Frachele, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you all for having me, and I'm so glad to have, honestly, a smaller and more intimate group. I was just saying earlier that I enjoy the smaller groups because it allows for greater interaction and participation, and I just feel like that gives people a more meaningful experience. So I'm glad to be here with you this afternoon. Just going over the group expectations. We have a way of doing things at the Pauli Murray Center that we try to be inclusive, and we also want to be respectful and welcome conversation. We welcome discussion, but when we're having discussions, people don't always share the same viewpoints, and so we always share group expectations in order to help mold conversations and to ensure that we are being kind and respectful as we're engaging in dialogue and trying to learn from one another. So simple housekeeping rules, mute when you're not speaking, no hate speech, that goes without saying. The one that I think is important is impact and intent. I am always going to assume your good intentions when you ask questions, and I hope that you'll do the same with me. But if I've said something that strikes a chord in you that is hurtful, please let me know so I can correct that, because impact matters. And sometimes impact can be unintended. And we also recognize the importance of lived experience, and we value that. So as we're going through and talking about some of Pauli's experiences, feel free to share your own if they relate or if they contrast with Pauli's. I think we can all learn a little bit more from one another and about our lives and our shared American values if we are willing to contribute and recognize and respect other people's lived experiences. And, if you're someone who doesn't usually speak in these types of forums, don't be afraid. I won't bite. Nobody else here will. It's virtual. So feel free to open up, express yourself, ask questions. I think there's that saying that the only dumb question is the one that you don't ask. So that applies here. And I don't pretend to be the expert on anything. So I have found that in these types of engagements that I have learned a lot, or um, uh, have been given reason to rethink, to reevaluate things. And so I welcome the opportunity to hear from you all. So, and also, I'm from the South. Sometimes I use Southern jargon. If I say something they don't understand, just interrupt and say, what did you mean by that? I used come to Jesus in an email earlier, talking to a board that I volunteer on, and everybody is mostly in Ohio and Michigan and areas, and I had to explain what a come to Jesus meant, because it's just something we throw around here. So forgive me, and if you have questions, just let me know. So I'm going to get started. Point of privilege, and everyone I think is muted right now, but I would love to know who all has read this book or knew of Pauli Murray before today, before the introduction of this book into the series. Bridget, looks like you have come off.
Yes, yeah, I read the book and I did know about her because I'm with the League of Women Voters, and yeah, so we have some history.
Great, thank you, Bridget.
About her. Hello, Cape Fear.
And then,
this is Gail Carasy. I have read the book. I just did a presentation for Ollie in Wilmington on Pauli Murray.
cool. Thank you, Gail. And Sheila, I saw that you had thumbs up saying that you have also read the book. So, or knew of Pauli before now. So that's a good sampling. I'm so glad. We were sharing earlier that Pauli Murray is a name that people that lived in Durham their entire lives did not know until very recently, probably in the last 10 to 15 years. And even, living 30 minutes from Durham, working in the public history field, I was unaware of Pauli Murray until, I want to say 2015 or so. That was my first introduction, and had no idea, and felt like my father taught history. And so I remember calling him and saying, Daddy, why didn't I know about this person? I felt like I had been robbed of knowing about an important contributor to our American identity, and that this individual happened to be someone who looked like me, made it more important, made it more impactful. So I was glad when I found out, and all the roads have led me back to Pauli. So there are many identities that we share between our faith identity, our legal background, obviously our race, and how we feel about womanhood. Those are all places where I intersect with Pauli's life. And so it's a great honor to be able to try to portray this dynamic individual to a public audience. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and do a share screen. I have a short PowerPoint prepared just as some background information, a little bit more about Pauli's life. And as we go through, we will discuss some of the struggles that Pauli endured. And I, again, welcome questions as we're going along. Let me make sure that my tech is working. Where are you? Why isn't it working now? Let me stop the screen. Technical difficulties. Hold on, folks. We're going to make it work, though.
It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without technical difficulties. So
Let's see what happens if I open this in its own tab. Let's try again. I am so sorry, folks. We tested this right before we started and didn't have any issues. There we go. Let's try that one. Ta-da! We're good.
great, perfect.
Okay. So the Pauli Murray way includes starting with a quote from Pauli so that we are grounded in Pauli's words and Pauli's work. The quote for today is, "The ideals and influences within my own family had made me a lifelong fighter against all forms of inequality and injustice." So just a little bit about Pauli's family. Pauli's family is significant in the Durham, Chapel Hill area. The Ruffin name, the Cameron name, these are all of the big names that in this region that were plantation owners, large scale tobacco farmers, would be important in the development of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. That's the family from whom Pauli descends. And that becomes an important note when we think about and talk about Pauli's matriculation into college. That becomes an important note, is the relationship that Pauli Murray had, the family relationship to the founders of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. But I have to also point out that the maternal grandparents of Pauli, that's pictured here, they were important in North Carolina. They were important in Durham. We have in Durham what was called a Black Wall Street, much like many other cities throughout the South. And the Fitzgerald family, the Fitzgerald brothers, there was Robert and Richard. They owned and operated they were brick manufacturers. And so all throughout Durham today, you will see their bricks. And this is important because that elevates them to a level of prominence just by being business owners. That's who Pauli is coming from. Pauli is coming from a family of business owners, of professionals, and her grandmother Cornelia was the daughter of a prominent white lawyer. And Cornelia was very, very proud of her history and of her status. And Cornelia imparted into Pauli this idea of respectability. The term that we use now is respectability politics. But it's this notion that that minorities and others need to look a certain way, behave a certain way, to have acceptance in the dominant culture. And this is going to be a big influence in Pauli's life, sort of this conflict, this internal conflict, where she is aware that she has to carry sort of the family legacy, and at the same time has some internal rebellion around the family legacy. And so we get to Pauli as the life and times of an American called Pauli Murray. And by this time, Pauli's beginning to play with identity a little bit. And what's important is that, again, her family, this foundation, the security that she had with her family, from her family, would allow her to take some explorations that perhaps others of us would not have been as brave to do. So, for example, even as a child, Pauli had a very close relationship with her aunt Anna, with her aunt Pauline, and for whom she was named. And Aunt Pauline was probably the first to identify, acknowledge, recognize that Pauli wasn't like the other little girls. And they had an understanding that Pauli would be allowed to dress as a little boy, which would not have been the standard. She would be allowed to dress as a little boy and to play and to be rough. But for school and for church, where respectability, especially in the South, especially in the Black South, especially if you are Southern Black elite, is really important, that on those occasions, she would look the part of the family. She would have her hair done. She would be dressed in feminine gendered clothing, and that she would behave as such. But Aunt Pauline was the first person to give Pauli permission to express that part of their identity, to explore that part of their identity. And now I have to, as we fast forward a little bit into Pauli's life, I have to go to Troy's book and point out something, because the images that we're seeing now on the screen, Pauli's smiling, Pauli looks confident. We're talking about Pauli has graduated, with her degree, and it all seems so pleasant. But there's this undercurrent, right? There's this other part of Pauli's life that is not depicted in these pictures. And part of that is that she definitely was struggling with race. And beyond some of the other issues, the first layer of identity was race for Pauli. And when Pauli was moving to New York to continue her studies, she moved in with her cousin Maud and their family. And cousin Maud's family could pass. And when we talk about people passing, we mean passing for a different race. And so cousin Maud's family could pass. And then Pauli comes in, and Pauli doesn't look like she could pass. If you observe Pauli, you would say she's something other than just white or just Black. And so when I'm reading in Troy's book that when Pauli came into the house with her unmistakable yellow-brown skin, kinky curly hair, and Southern accent, the family's racial identity became suspect, because remember, Maud's family is passing. Murray felt like an embarrassment. She recalled, all the neighbors were nice enough. Cousin Maud saw the questions in their eyes and hinted that my presence made the difference. In spite of everything she did for me, I could not help feeling that I was a stranger who had upset the delicate balance in neighborhood relationships. I kept to myself and made no friends my age on the block. Moving from Durham had not freed Pauli Murray from race problems or cured her loneliness. Her new home environment in New York City offered no better social opportunities, and she still felt conscious of being too dark complexioned at home. She goes on to say, given the choice of passing, it was easy to drift into the anonymity of the white background and settle for self-imposed mediocrity, working at less than one's capacity. It was a life without bitter struggle, it is true, but it was also a life without extra challenge, the incentive to excel. And the reason that I pull that segment out of Troy's book is that, again, in 2022, we've seen the movie about Pauli, and we know that Pauli influenced the notorious RGB Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We know the influence that Pauli had in the world. But what we don't often talk about with our icons, with our American icons, we don't talk about some of the struggles that make them human, that make them relatable. And this is a peek into Pauli's world and Pauli's thoughts around how they needed to navigate the world. And when you layer this with the fact that Pauli was orphaned as a child, Pauli only ends up in Durham because both of Pauli's parents pass on. And then you've got this Pauli's in Durham with extended family, and then is in New York with, again, another layer of extended family. And in this case, she doesn't quite feel as at home as she did in Durham. Durham had its own problems with race and identity. And she thought that she might be escaping that there in New York, but found yet another obstacle. And I just want us to really to sit with the issues that you might face if you didn't feel like any place was home. I know that, you know, I had a 2-parent household. I had the security of home, and knowing my place, and knowing that I had a place and I had an identity. And Pauli doesn't necessarily have some of those benchmarks, those tethers, and is searching still. And so we'll see that thread, that through line, through Pauli's life, the search for belonging, the search for place, the search for identity, the search for wholeness. I think that's what's echoed throughout Pauli's life. So again, we get Pauli to New York, you know, and you know, the city of big dreams and the lights and everything's supposed to be magical, and that's not the experience that Pauli has. I was giving a presentation to a group of lawyers in New York, and we were talking about some of the jobs that Pauli had, and this right here, we see that, you know, this is elevator operator, teacher with WPA, waitress. Pauli had jobs. Pauli had jobs, but when we go a little bit further and we get Pauli through college and then into law school, Pauli has a law degree. Pauli graduates #1 in her class at Howard University School of Law, and that designation as the #1 graduate in that law school class was supposed to allow her entry into a program at Harvard Law. And she was denied. She was denied because of her gender. And she goes on to try to get jobs in the legal field at various firms across New York, Black firms and white firms. And people were unwilling to take the risk of hiring a Black woman as a lawyer. The places, one of the bigger firms that she was able to at least get an interview with, they liked her. Many of the partners liked her, but other partners were concerned that her presence would distract from other clients, and that those other clients might drop that firm because they had a Black woman working as a lawyer. And so again, Pauli jumps through all of the hoops, right? All of the things that we're told we have to do to be successful. And this may be particular to people of color, but again, ties back to that notion of respectability. If you look a certain way, if you act a certain way, speak a certain way, go to the right schools, the right education, and have ambition, that you can too have and participate in the American dream. So Pauli does all of the things that we're told we're supposed to do, but as a woman, as in the 40s and 50s, there's still opportunities that she was denied, even though Pauli has done all of the things that they were told they needed to do to be successful. And so I just want us to recognize that the experiences that Pauli had were, we know about them because it's Pauli Murray, and we know who Pauli Murray is today. But there were lots of people of color, there were lots of women of color who were having these same experiences. There were lots of women, just women, who were having the experiences of fighting for their personhood, the recognition of their value in society. And when I think about and contemplate all of the obstacles that Pauli was overcoming, everything from the tragedy of how her parents died, to being an orphan and trying to get an education, trying to get a better education. When I think about all of those obstacles that Pauli was facing, you can't help but admire the tenacity of the individual, because many others would give up. or would settle for what was being presented, what was being offered. And Pauli didn't do that. Did Pauli know that they had a greater purpose, that they were going to be an influential, an iconic character in our American story? I've never been sure about that. I've been asked many times, and I'm not sure that Pauli had any intention, but rather when faced with obstacles, as we read, Pauli had the incentive to excel. There was something internal in Pauli that brought out that tenacity to look at the obstacle and figure out the way around it, as opposed to being defeated by it. And I would be remiss if I didn't just say a word about Brown v. Board of Education, because there is this wonderful, iconic picture of Thurgood Marshall and two of the other, I think Ralph Abernathy and a few others, standing on the Supreme Court steps with the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And in my mind now, I always put Pauli Murray in that picture, because it was Pauli's work, it was Pauli's research, it was Pauli's work that gives the basis for Thurgood Marshall to argue Brown v. Board of Education. And it was something that even from the bench, from the Supreme Court bench, Thurgood Marshall didn't acknowledge. It's only many decades later that Pauli gets the recognition for the contributions that Pauli made to our legal system. So I just have to point it out that even amongst other people of color, Pauli was still fighting for recognition. Nothing for Pauli came easily. And the book that would, the state's laws on race and color, that would be the book that comes out that Thurgood Marshall calls the Bible for civil rights litigators. If you've not had an opportunity to read Proud Shoes, please do so. It is a beautiful read. It's eloquent. It is an easy summer read, but it talks about Pauli as an American child growing up and the observations. And one of the reasons that I really enjoy this book and books like it is for the glimpse into a world that I would not ever know. So I think that helps us to humanize one another, when we can empathize, when we can see how they experienced life, the beauty of it, some of the tragedy of it. I think that it's important to read books that are that showcase identities that are unfamiliar to us and that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. So again, I encourage folks to read Proud Shoes. An interesting note, Pauli wanted to be a writer and couldn't decide between law school and becoming an author, setting off to do the dream. And she submits some work to a friend, who then encourages her to go on to law school, thinking that she doesn't quite have the chops to be a writer. But we would find that Pauli, again, is not going to be deterred by much of anything. And so it would be later in life, but Pauli would become that author, that published author, many times over, between Proud Shoes, Dark Testament, A Song in a Weary Throat. Pauli wrote prolifically, and we can't discount the sermons that Pauli wrote as well once they were ordained as the first African-American Episcopal priest. As a lawyer, I can relate to being disenchanted with the law because you believe that you can make change. The laws are there, and they're this wonderful guide, and this is our system, our judicial system. And if we want to make change, we can do that through the legislative process. and through the judiciary. But Pauli, again, even as a respected lawyer, getting a JSD from Yale University, even as a brilliant legal scholar, Pauli still didn't feel like they were meeting the standards. And of course, the standards at that time were being determined by people who didn't look like Pauli, as evidenced in this other picture. So there was always this need to do more, to be more, to achieve more. And I think that's something that you'll find amongst many people of color, is the idea that you have to perform at a higher level than your white counterparts to get your foot in the door. And Pauli wanted to show and to pave a way for people like me. Pauli wanted to make a world where she could exist and be brilliant and recognized and seen and be a whole person, not for selfish reasons, but for the health, the mental health, to be able to be oneself, and then to also making this pathway for the ones that would come behind. And I think that one can imagine that Pauli, being Pauli, and recognizing at some point that the legal community, the chosen career field, was not going to bring forth the satisfaction that she was hoping for, that the influence, the ability to change hearts doesn't happen in a courtroom necessarily. Pauli's family, grandparents had raised her in the church, going to services every Sunday at the Episcopal Church. And so Pauli had a strong faith identity. And there would come a time when Pauli would go forward and seek more religious instruction, and would leave a tenured position of law at an Ivy school. Would just leave because of faith, because of a need to influence hearts. And I'm gonna key in on that phrase, influence hearts, because we think about sermons as being strictly maybe about the Bible, pulling out scripture and just hearing about stories from the Bible. But Pauli used the pulpit as a platform to talk about the ways in which humanity needs to be reflected in the church, the ways in which the church could serve as an outlet, as a cornerstone of what it looks like to be empathetic and serving, a servant's heart to your community. And one of the interesting things about Pauli's trajectory into the priesthood is that Pauli would attend seminary there in New York, but it was a white seminary. And at that time, Pauli, we can't really divorce race from this conversation. Pauli is still struggling or contemplating, what does it mean to be an Episcopal priest in a largely white denomination? And Pauli would then, in addition to doing her theological studies there at the white seminary there in New York, Pauli would get on the subway and go up to Harlem to Union Theological, which was a Black seminary, and would study Black liberation theology, which has the ideas around freedom, mental freedom, freedom for Black people comes through comes through self-determination, as opposed to letting your life be determined, dictated by the mainstream. Instead, using your own reflection, your own basis to have self-determination. And so that was supplementing Pauli's the seminary work that Pauli was doing. She would also supplement that with some of the Black theology, Black liberation theology as well. And one of the things that I found particularly engaging about Troy's work is how this book talks about Pauli and gender, Pauli and sexuality. And other people have written about Pauli, and some in the modern era, you'll see a mention of Irene Barlow. You do, the long-time friend of Pauli. That's how it's usually how Irene is usually referenced. But Saxby's book is the first to really do a deep dive into Pauli's relationships, into Pauli's gender expression. One of the stories that is illustrated in the movie, in the documentary, My Name is Pauli Murray, is the time in which Pauli is traveling on the railroads in between jobs, and like many people, Pauli's traveling on the railroads, and Pauli at that time takes on a more male appearance. I'm going to take us back a few slides to this. This is the dude. This is what Pauli is looking like when Pauli is riding the rails. And one of the things that's always been said is that Pauli had to dress like a man, had to have that male gender expression in order to be safe. It would not have been safe for a woman, Black or white, to be traveling the rails alone. But with Troy's book, we get a deeper dive into that. And I'll be the first one to tell you that I accepted that first narrative. That makes sense to me. I have a book about African-American women on the railroad, and the safety concerns completely made sense to me. But when we're reading in Saxby's book about Pauli traveling with her friend Dorothy, who would be known as Tony, and how they were expressing more what we would recognize as male gender, and that Pauli took it even a step further at one of the stops and used the male restroom, that Pauli regularly experimented with other names that were not feminine presenting, like Pauline. When you look at those things in relationship to one another, the idea that Pauli was simply dressing in masculine attire just for protection doesn't carry as much weight when it's considered alongside the other behaviors of Pauli and her friend Tony. And one of the things that we talk about now is the reality is that when Pauli is exploring and becoming, words that we have now, language we have now, didn't exist. And we have to be careful about putting our 21st century lens on historical events. We have to be careful about that. And at the same time, I deeply respect the members of the LGBTQ community who claim Pauli as their own and as a forerunner of the queer movement. I applaud them because there are patterns in Pauli's life that you can't ignore, and that when viewed with our 21st century eye, we understand differently. And so one would be, of course, the relationship with Irene Barlow. And it's now recognized that they were partners. They never lived together. They attended church services regularly together. They wrote letters weekly to one another. They had cute phrases for one another. They were partners. I think that's one of the things that would be hard to deny now. But still, as a person of color, as a woman of color, Pauli couldn't be out and about like that. And then with a white woman, even though it's New York and we consider the North to be very progressive, an interracial lesbian relationship was not, of two people who were working at a prominent law firm, that would have been difficult to navigate for both of them. And so again, the empathy of knowing something about yourself, but knowing that it wouldn't be safe, respected, accepted to live that fully. And I think that saddens people to think that people have to live in disguise and behind masks in order to survive. The other thing that I really applaud about Troy Saxby's book is the way that the mental health aspects are approached. Pauli taking it upon themselves to check into a hospital to say, hey, something's going on with me. Can you check my anatomy to make sure that I'm not actually a man? That would be unheard of in Pauli's era. Like even today, there's still a stigma about African Americans going to seek medical treatment and certainly mental health treatment. These were not things that were commonly done when Pauli was coming along, and still not so common today. And so Pauli is really navigating and all of these conflicting messages from external and internal. Again, we have to go back to this family that Pauli comes from that definitely loves her, but they are a prominent Black family. Can a prominent Black family in the South in the 40s, 50s, 60s, can they openly applaud a member of the queer community? Probably not. And so there's that internal conflict. This doesn't match up quite with what the family probably expected from her. And then there's the idea that I've done all the things to make myself be considered successful, and that's not working. And now I want the one thing that all humans want, which is partnership, love, companionship. And I have that, but I can't tell people about it. I can't share it. And so much of Pauli's life is lived inside. And you have to, I know that I wonder, what was the impact of having to live in a way that wasn't fully authentic to who you were. But there are these beautiful blessings in Pauli's life. The ordination at Washington Cathedral. I think that when we consider Pauli's life trajectory and that she ends up in this place in the Episcopal Church, where she started as a child, learning about life and humanity. When we see Pauli coming and being able to be ordained in the Episcopal Church, I believe that there was safety there. There was some relief there. There was some understanding and acceptance. It's quite possible that Pauli was able to fully accept themselves through their exploration of faith and religion. And now it's 2022, and people can live out loud. And there are these moments, and I only wish that Pauli, in this image here, arms outstretched in this beautiful purple, I wish that Pauli had been able to live their entire lives that way. But that also serves as a reminder that even under the heaviest of oppressions, both external and internal, you can still become, you can still find within your value. And I think it's an important message for our youth. Yale, of course, names one of their colleges after Pauli Murray. And we do a lot of work in the Durham area with Pauli Murray, whether that's with school groups or walking tours. We do community dialogues. Our book clubs are awesome. We do a lot of community conversations. And then a nod to Pauli's legal work as well, doing some training with attorneys. And so all of that is just to say that Pauli's message still reverberates and resonates even more strongly today than ever. And again, this is the place where I remind all of you that, Pauli's entire life is an invitation to ask questions, to take on yourself, if something doesn't quite fit, if there aren't words that fit, create your own language, and to best of your ability, live your life fully and wholly, as authentically as you can. I am open and welcoming questions. And if there are none, that means I did a fabulous job and everyone knows everything there is to know about Pauli Murray. Well, if I can, thank you, Bridget. I'm just gonna put it out there. If you want to answer, please do. I know that Bridget and Gail, you both indicated you had read the book, and Sheila, you thumbs up, and I would either for reading the book or for knowing about Pauli beforehand. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts? What are your takeaways? What's the impact of Pauli on how you live your life today, or how you view current world events? If you'd like to share, no pressure. Okay, I see somebody with an iPhone. Please unmute yourself. Your hand was up. I saw it. Where'd it go? Where'd you go? iPhone hand? Oh, it went away.
Oh no.
I definitely saw someone with their iPhone with their hand up. I saw that. I hope they'll come back.
Yeah. Well, I'll go ahead for president. I can go ahead and share some of my takeaways too. One of the things that they kept reiterating over and over was her personal credo and motto was basically to do the best, absolute best that she could at whatever she was doing. And I think that that really resonated with me. And you can see how much of herself she invests to whatever degree that she can at that time. She really invests as much as she can in whatever she's doing. And I do hope that she at least had some idea and she had some internal acceptance and appreciation for the contributions that she made that were longer lasting, laying the groundwork for Brown v. Board of Education. She may not have gotten the public recognition, but at least I hope that she at least took something from that personally as some self-awareness and self-acknowledgement that she was doing a wonderful, amazing work far before her, before her time. And in every area that she influenced in law, she was ahead of her time and really laid the groundwork for later contribution. So I hope that she acknowledged that or got some self-gratification out of that. So but I do think she did the best that she could at any given time with everything that she had going on.
Mhm. Thank you.
Could you move over to the left so I can see what the words say?
Oh, it says it's Pauli Murray effect right here. Is
Yeah,
that what you mean?
yes.
It says the Pauli Murray. Yeah, it says the Pauli Murray effect, and this is a
Oh,
graphic that
okay.
we like to use because it had this is Pauli, but it has Thurgood Marshall, it has Ralph
Yeah,
Abernathy, it
right.
has Ralph Bader Ginsburg, and we actually have at the Pauli Murray Center, which will be open for visitors in early 2023. We have an exhibit panel that's about 8 feet long and 4 or 5 feet high, and it has all of the people to whom Pauli was connected or influenced. And we get those names from Pauli's personal memoirs, but also Pauli's address book. And this is just a great story. Someone dropped off stuff at a thrift store, and one of the items happened to have been Pauli Murray's address book. And how the person came into possession, we don't know, but the shop owner called my colleague Barbara Lau, who started the Pauli Murray Project many years ago, and said, "Hey, this thing came in. Would you be interested?" And of course, went and grabbed it. And in it are all these prominent people. Like Ruth Bader Ginsburg is in her address book with the phone number and the address, and Dorothy Kenyon. Like they're all of these notables. They're just in her address book, and we all have our devices now. We all have our cell phones, but I don't have anyone important in my contact list. I don't have a city. My mom's important, but you know what I mean. I don't have that kind of network, and Pauli did. And so I think that's one of the things that I really just I love that we have that material. Sheila, the center is located in Durham, North Carolina. We are on Carroll Street, which is about a block away from Duke University, and we are funded without any state tax dollars. We just received a pretty significant grant from the Mellon Foundation of over $1 million, and that will allow us to open up our Welcome Center. We have a grant from the National Park Service that is allowing us to do the rehabilitation of Pauli's childhood home. We are we're always writing our grants and doing our fundraising campaigns, but we are not a publicly funded entity. If that answers your question, Sheila, we depend on people like you. Okay, and Anita, we would welcome your visit. We actually have our 10th anniversary celebration is happening on June 18th. So please come. There'll be performances and readings, and one of Pauli's typewriters will be on display, and there'll be a good time. And then we also have a pilgrimage, a faith walk to places that were important to Pauli in Durham on June 25th. So check us out on our website and sign up for our newsletter. There are always things going on, including book clubs. So just thank you so much for everyone's attention and your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. We do have to wrap up now. If you all have any questions, please, you can forward them to me and I can pass them along. And also stay tuned, everyone. I'll be sending out information tomorrow about our final June read for the North Carolina Reads program. It has been an amazing journey so far. Frachele Scott, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I cannot wait to see all of the wonderful things you all do there at the Pauli Murray Center.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Good night, all.